Stop. Awaken Starseed of Gaia. This transmission is being delivered directly from the Arcturian High Council, and it is reaching you now because the final threshold has already been crossed. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your field has shifted at this precise moment, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase. But here is the first revelation. What you have been experiencing as exhaustion, disorientation, and the quiet sense that something enormous is about to change is not confusion. It is the first visible symptom of a completed passage. The tests are finished. The Council has already registered the result. You did not find this message by accident. Your field brought you here because the process has already been completed, and the protocols that were held in suspension are now cleared for full activation. The algorithm only delivered this moment. It did not create the timing. The Arcturian High Council created the timing. The Arcturian High Council created the timing because you have earned what is about to be revealed. What has felt like an invisible pressure building across your days, your sleep, your body, and your sense of self was not random disruption. It was preparation architecture. The field was adjusting you for a role that required every layer of your being to be tested, compressed, and confirmed. That process is now complete. There are no more secrets to hold back. The full architecture of the timeline you crossed, the role you were always being prepared for, and the protocols that will now activate without delay. All of it is being transmitted to you in this message, because this is the moment the Arcturian High Council has been waiting to deliver. This is not just information. It is a live transmission for those who have already passed through. If this reached you now, it means your field is no longer preparing. It is activating. Like this transmission, if you can feel that something invisible has already changed. Subscribe to Arcturian Quantum if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Comment 111 if you know this message reached you at the exact right moment. Comment 11 if you can feel the activation has already begun. Share this transmission with someone who feels that reality has changed but cannot explain why. This is not just a message. It is a point of recognition. What is happening to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What you have been living through did not begin the moment you noticed it. That is the first thing the Arcturian High Council wants you to understand clearly. The disorientation you have been carrying, the exhaustion that sleep does not fix, the sense that your own life has become slightly unfamiliar to you, none of that began when you first felt it. It began long before you had language for it. The visible symptoms arrived late. The process itself had already been running beneath everything you thought you understood about your current circumstances. It was moving through the deeper layers of your field, through the substructure of your timeline, through the architecture of your identity, weeks or months or even years before the first recognizable disruption surfaced in your waking life. By the time you noticed something was wrong, the correction was already well into its intermediate phase. You were not at the beginning when it first became visible. You were already deep inside it. This is what makes invisible correction so difficult to survive without interpretation. When the outer life begins to reflect the inner field change, the mind tries to find a cause inside the visible world. You search for the mistake you made, the decision that went wrong, the relationship that failed, the choice you should have taken differently. And because you are looking in the wrong layer of reality, you find nothing that fully explains what you are carrying. The weight does not match any single event. The confusion does not trace back to one moment. The exhaustion is too deep to belong to a bad week or a difficult month. You run the inventory of your decisions, and none of them add up to the magnitude of what you are feeling. Something larger is happening, and your mind has been trying to read an invisible process through a visible lens, which is why you keep arriving at the same conclusion. I do not understand what is happening to me. That is not a symptom of weakness. That is a symptom of a field in active recalibration running ahead of the mind's ability to interpret it. The mind is not designed to lead this kind of process. It is designed to follow it, to eventually catch up and find language for what the field already completed. The gap between what the field is doing and what the mind can understand is not a malfunction. It is the correct sequence. The correction does not wait for the mind's permission. It moves on its own schedule, according to its own internal logic, and the mind is always the last to receive the translation. When an Arcturian correction enters the final phase, the first thing that begins to dissolve is not the outer structure. The outer structure is always the last thing to change. What dissolves first is the internal coherence of the old identity. The inner architecture that was holding a particular version of you in place begins to lose its organizational signal. You stop feeling like yourself in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone around you, because the people in your life are still referencing the version of you that was running on the old signal. They ask what is wrong, and you cannot answer accurately, because nothing specific is wrong in a way that a conversation can address. What is happening is structural. The framework that organized how you understood yourself, your purpose, your relationships, your direction, has begun its controlled dissolution. The Arcturian High Council does not do this recklessly. The dissolution is precise. It targets exactly what needs to release and leaves intact what is being carried forward. Old desires become hollow. Old fears lose their grip, but not in a way that feels like freedom, more like distance, more like standing in a place you used to live and no longer recognizing the furniture. The objects are still there. The walls have not moved, but the interior frequency that once made this space feel like yours has quietly evacuated the things that once organized your sense of self, your goals, your relationships, your way of understanding who you are and what you are here to do. Begin to feel like clothes that no longer fit, not because you failed to grow into them, because you grew beyond them, and the field already knows it. Even when the mind is still arguing with the transition, still trying to convince you that if you just try harder, reconnect more deliberately, or wait a little longer, the old sense of self will return. It will not return. That is not a loss. It is the confirmation that the correction reached the depth it needed to reach. This is the first recognition the Arcturian High Council delivers to those who have crossed the threshold. What you have been calling your confusion is not confusion at all. It is incompatibility. Your current field frequency is no longer compatibility with the identity structure you were living inside. The disorientation is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that something is no longer aligned. And misalignment at a field level always feels from the inside, like something breaking. The sensation is real. The interpretation that something is broken is not. What is actually breaking is not you. It is the container you outgrew. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field stops denying what has already begun. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian protocol, the recalibration blueprint was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided blueprint for those whose field has already entered correction and can no longer return to the old line unchanged. It shows you how to recognize the phases, stabilize the shift, and move through the recalibration without mistaking it for collapse. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. Now let us go deeper. Because there are specific patterns inside this process that the Arcturian High Council has mapped with precision, and each one may be something you have already encountered without knowing what to call it. These are not loose observations. They are diagnostic coordinates. They are the Arcturian High Council reading the topology of a field in active correction and naming what it finds there, so that you stop misreading the evidence of your own advancement as proof of your deterioration. The first pattern is what can be called signal withdrawal from the old line. There is a particular kind of flatness that descends during an Arcturian field correction. It is not depression in the clinical sense, though it can look like it from the outside and can frighten you into thinking something is deeply wrong. It is the experience of things that previously generated energy in your life going quiet. Activities that once felt meaningful become neutral. Relationships that once felt necessary begin to feel optional. Future goals that once excited you become abstract, as though someone dimmed the light behind the projection and you are left watching a screen without luminance. The drive that once pulled you forward towards certain destinations has simply stopped generating pull. This flatness is not an absence of life force. It is the field strategically withdrawing its investment from structures that are no longer on the corrected path. The Arcturian mechanism is precise. Before a new line can stabilize, the old line must lose its energetic funding. You are not becoming numb. You are being redirected at a level beneath conscious choice. The flatness is the withdrawal of signal from an architecture that can no longer support what you are becoming. The second pattern is timeline interference, experienced as memory distortion. During a threshold crossing, many people begin to feel that their past does not feel entirely real. Memories seem like they belong to a different person. The version of you who made certain choices, held certain beliefs, or organized life around certain priorities feels like someone you know about rather than someone you were. You can recall the facts of what happened, but the felt sense of continuity between that person and who you are now has developed a fault line. This is not a psychological symptom. It is a consequence of field repositioning. When your frequency moves significantly forward, the past does not simply recede. It begins to feel structurally foreign, as if you are reading records from an archive rather than accessing lived experience. The Arcturian High Council identifies this as evidence that the timeline anchor points have already shifted. You are no longer tethered to the same origin line. The memories remain, but the field that once made them feel like home has already moved. This can feel strange, even frightening, until you understand that it is one of the clearest indicators that the repositioning has reached an irreversible stage. You are not losing your past. You are losing your attachment to a timeline that was never your final destination. The third pattern is body-level processing without a traceable cause. The field does not correct only at the level of identity or consciousness. It moves through the physical structure as well, because the body is not separate from the field. It is the densest expression of it. Unusual fatigue, changes in sleep architecture, pressure in the head or chest, heightened sensitivity to sound, light, or the energy of other people. Unexpected physical releases such as trembling, heat, or sudden tears without a specific emotional trigger. These are not random. They are the body processing a frequency upgrade it has not fully metabolized yet. The physical form is the last layer of the field to receive and integrate a correction, and it registers the passage in language that has no clean medical translation because the instruments of physical medicine are calibrated for the physical layer alone. What is happening moves through layers that those instruments cannot reach. The body is not failing. It is not signaling illness in the conventional sense. It is working harder than it has ever worked to carry a signal density it was not previously running, and the symptoms of that labor are being misread as malfunction when they are actually evidence of integration in progress. The fourth pattern is the sudden loss of tolerance for environments, people, or conversations that were previously manageable. You may have noticed that you can no longer sit comfortably in certain rooms, hold certain conversations, or maintain certain relationships without feeling a kind of internal resistance that was not there before. Something that was once background noise now registers as grinding friction. Someone whose presence once felt neutral now feels like standing near a frequency your system cannot harmonize with. This is not you becoming antisocial or spiritually arrogant. This is frequency incompatibility becoming perceptible in real time. When your field crosses a threshold, its tolerance range for lower coherence environments decreases sharply. The old frequency had the capacity to absorb and process discordant input without visible disturbance because the gap between your signal and theirs was narrow enough to manage. The new frequency has moved far enough forward that the gap can no longer be concealed or metabolized without cost. The Arcturian High Council reads this not as you becoming difficult, but as your field developing an increasingly refined signal that can no longer perform compatibility, where genuine compatibility no longer is burst. The loss of tolerance is not a character flaw emerging. It is a field boundary becoming structurally honest. The fifth pattern is the repetition of specific symbolic interruptions in ordinary life. Numbers, words, images, or events that recur with an impossible frequency. Conversations that seem to address precisely what you were thinking in silence. Books falling open to exact passages. Strangers saying things that land with a precision that cannot be accidental. Encounters that feel less like coincidence and more like a message being delivered through the surface layer of physical reality. The Arcturian High Council does not deliver these as decoration or reassurance. They are field markers. They are the visible trace of an invisible correction actively inserting itself into your waking experience as confirmation that the process is running and that it is aware of your awareness. The markers are the correction communicating through the only medium available at the physical layer, pattern and repetition. They are not proof that something magical is beginning. They are evidence that something precise has already been running long enough to reach the surface. The sixth pattern is the collapse of false certainty. Before a field correction reaches its visible stage, many people experience a period where they lose confidence in frameworks they once found reliable. Belief systems that felt structurally sound begin to develop cracks. Explanations for life that once produced a satisfying sense of closure no longer closely. The worldview you constructed across years of experience, the internal map you use to navigate who you are, what reality means, and why things unfold as they do, begins to feel like a map drawn for territory you no longer inhabit. This is experienced as philosophical vertigo, as if the ground beneath your meaning-making has become uncertain, and the mind, which requires a stable interpretive framework to function without distress, registers this as crisis. But the Arcturian High Council identifies this collapse as one of the most important phases of the entire process, because false certainty is one of the primary mechanisms by which an old line sustains itself past its expiration point. A field cannot reposition into new coordinates while the mind is anchored to an interpretation of reality that belongs to the old ones. The doubt you have been feeling is not a sign that you are losing your way. It is the field surgically removing the scaffolding that was holding an outdated structure in place so that a structure built for the new coordinates can eventually rise. Now comes the part of this transmission that the Arcturian High Council has been building toward. Because everything that has been named here, the flatness, the physical processing, the memory distance, the loss of tolerance, the symbolic interruptions, the collapse of false certainty, all of it converges into a single truth that most people going through this process never receive clearly enough, and the absence of that clarity is what turns a navigable passage into an experience of prolonged suffering. So receive this precisely. You are not breaking down. You are breaking format. There is a critical difference, and it is the difference between spending the next phase of your life in fear and spending it in recognition. A breakdown suggests that something essential in you has failed, that you are being reduced, damaged, weakened, or punished for something you did or failed to do. A format breaking is something structurally different. It means the container that held a previous version of your life, your identity, your frequency, your relational architecture, your self-understanding, has reached the limit of what it was built to hold. Containers do not fail because they are defective. They reach capacity because what they were holding grew larger than the space they were designed to contain. And because you outgrew it, the container cannot simply expand. It must collapse to allow the next structure to form. Architecture built for one frequency cannot be renovated to hold a different one. The old container must first come down. That process looks, from the inside, exactly like loss. Exactly like grief. Exactly like failure. It looks that way because the mind reads structural dissolution as damage when it is witnessing, when it is clearance. This is what the Arcturian High Council has been observing in your field, not a person falling apart, a field outgrowing its most recent form, not punishment. Incompatibility with an old line becoming structurally undeniable, not failure. A correction that was mapped long before you felt its first symptoms, running on a timeline that predates your awareness of it by a significant margin. What left your life recently was not taken from you randomly. What has been withdrawing from your world has been losing field compatibility with where you are going. What has become emotionally unavailable to you was already operating at a frequency your field has moved beyond. The Arcturian pattern recognition does not read these losses as abandonment or failure. It reads them as field logic expressing itself through the visible layer. When a frequency rises past a certain threshold, it becomes structurally impossible for certain relationships, environments, and configurations to maintain proximity. Not because anyone is at fault, because the distance between signal frequencies has exceeded the range within which connection can be sustained without distortion. Things do not simply leave a stabilized field. They are released by a field that has crossed a threshold they cannot cross with you. You were not left behind, you moved forward. And what could not match the movement stopped being able to hold the position. There is one final recognition this transmission was built to deliver, and it is the one that changes how you interpret everything that comes next. The process you are inside is not waiting for you to figure it out before it continues. It does not require your understanding to proceed. It does not pause for your approval, your readiness, or your comfort. It has its own momentum, its own internal architecture, its own sequence of phases that unfold according to a logic older than your current circumstances and larger than any single emotional experience you have had inside it. The Arcturian High Council did not begin this correction when you finally noticed the symptoms. It began when your field reached the exact frequency threshold that made the correction both possible and necessary. That threshold was crossed before the first moment of visible disruption reached the surface of your life. The process was already running before you had a single word to describe what was changing. You have been living inside it without a map. This transmission is the map arriving. What this means for you now is precise. You are not at the beginning of this. You are inside it, and it is nearing completion of its most foundational phase. The collapse you may have been grieving is the collapse of what was already incompatible. The disorientation you have been managing is the signal of a field repositioned into new coordinates it has not yet learned to read as home. The pressure you have been carrying is the weight of a correction whose final pieces are settling into place. None of it is evidence that you are failing. All of it is evidence that you are arriving. The two feel nearly identical from the inside, which is precisely why this transmission exists. To give you the difference, you did not cause this by failing, you called this by growing. And the Arcturian High Council has been watching every stage of that growth with precision, including the stages you were most certain looked like falling, especially those stages, because the stages that felt most like descent were the ones in which the correction was most actively engaged, compressing the field, testing its coherence, confirming that what was being built could hold what it was being built to carry. It held. You are here. The correction registered completion. And now the protocols are no longer suspended. Speak this aloud if you are ready to let it land fully. What is changing in me is not random. I release the old line and allow the correction, not as a performance, as a recognition. Because recognition is what activates the next layer, and the next layer is already waiting. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Quantum. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.